It's the Kink Consultant podcast, where we're turning up the heat on all things kink and dating, relationships, and pop culture. So close the door, plug in your headphones, and let's get down to it.
Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the Kink Consultant. I am here with Emma Velicky, the founder of Saturday Box, a kink and roleplay adventure company. Hey Emma, welcome.
Hey, so great to be here.
I'm really excited to have you on, especially because I did the Saturday Box that I got about 2 weeks ago, and I've kept super quiet about it. I've not told anyone about the experience, and I am dying to tell you. Someone actually. So I'm excited to chat about how much fun I had doing an interrogation scene. But before we get into all of that, I want to talk to you about Saturday Box in general. From the founder's mouth, I want to know how you started Saturday Box.
Well, so Saturday Box is kind of my life work. It's a little bit silly, but for me, I grew up in a religious, kind of sex-negative environment, and I knew that I was kinky, but I had no words to describe it. So when you go into an environment where sex is a big no, kink and bondage, restraints and spanking, like people don't even give you language to describe it. So a lot of my fulfillment was coming from, the media, the great romance stories that I was seeing. I preferred the damsel in distress maybe when she was in distress rather than when she got rescued, so that was kind of an indicator. But I was thriving off these stories. It led me to, become a romance author, to explore all of these creative pursuits and throw my energy into that. At the same time, lagging behind it, I would say, was a little bit of my practical experience, learning what it is to actually negotiate that kind of thing with partners, having actual words for the first time in actual sexual education. But finally, it's, really started to catch up when I met my current husband, who was not, super kinky to begin with, but he is a game designer. And his way of looking at kink and playfulness was so refreshing and so filling, and we were able to use, our great relationship skills and communication, and also our professional creative energy to really create novel experiences for us. And when I realized that people were, asking me, what do I do next? What's the tip? Coming back for more, I was like, this really could be something to help other people to close the gap between these amazing fantasy experiences they have in their head and the reality that often comes with it. So that's kind of the genesis of Saturday Box.
I love the genesis, but I need to take a moment because I'm obsessed with love and romance. You are a romance author who got together with a game designer who then brought both of these skills together to create Saturday Box.
Yes, absolutely. We do a thing where probably I'm, doing more of the nitty gritty and I do the actual writing, but we've been doing this thing where, he's coming up with the game mechanics, and we really look at it through that way, through the lens of we want there to be these replayable experiences with different roles for people. And that's, I think, very different than a lot of approaches in this space that are really educational learning library. This is really trying to get you in that mindset where you don't feel self-conscious because you're just playing. You don't have to feel like I'm doing role play now, because you are taking on the role. For example, that box you did, you don't have to pretend to be interrogating someone. You are interrogating them. It's just through a lens, that's playful and that both parties really want what they're going to get. So we like to say it's like a game where everyone wins.
When I found out about Saturday Box, I immediately went through, and there were 4 or 5 options of different, I think there were 4 options that I could do at the time. The 2 that stick out are the interrogation box, because anyone who follows me knows my favorite scene is an interrogation scene, so that stuck out. The second one was a fairy, and I'm not into fantasy at all, but this fairy box stood out because I was like, I want to role play a fairy. But I did end up going with the interrogation box for one reason. I wanted to test you guys out a little bit, and I was like, I know a lot about an interrogation scene. Let me see how they do it. And also I wanted my play partner to be able to learn. I don't want to teach every step of how to do an interrogation scene when they're the ones interrogating me. So I was like, yeah, I could use a little assist from Saturday Box. So when it arrived, and it had so much prep work, but also there was no line by line, say this and then this. It was like, here's your character, here's your objective, here's how she's going to set it up. Go. I was like, okay, this is the right amount of hand-holding and also choose your own adventure that I wanted in a role play kink adventure for us, and it worked really well. I'm obsessed with this now. I'm going to try not to just go through every aspect of it so people can be surprised when they get it. It makes sense now that I understand there was a game designer and a romance author teamed up to produce this?
I'm so happy you had a great experience with it, because I would probably say a lot of the people that come to Saturday Box are more beginners, and this is kind of their entry into space, but I really wanted to create something that was going to work for people with all experience levels, especially because you might have a partner, one who's very experienced, one who's not as experienced, or two people who are experienced, but this is a fantasy you haven't quite done yet, and you don't want to have to, walk them through it, because then that kind of takes away some of the mystery. And I think another component there is from the sub side of things, like a submissive side of things, and then honestly with Saturday Box we usually stray away from using like dom and sub. We usually just go by the rules, but we very much are adhering to, like an M dom F sub template. The thing from the sub side is that's something I experienced in my own life, which is you might have the knowledge of what you kind of want, or you have the inklings of what you kind of want, but it's very scary, and we always call it like topping from the bottom, right? If you want to get what you want and you have to tell them like I want you to tie it up, like there's everything loses it. So it's like if we can kind of come in as your confidant and to be really representing you, and you look at it and you go, yes, this is me, and you can kind of pass that on to the other person, like that's a great experience. And then on the other side of things, if you're a dominant person and you want to do this kind of stuff to your partner, I think especially for men there can be that fear of like, is it going to come off as creepy? Are they going to misunderstand me? Because kink kind of can have a bad rep. And here when we have Saturday Box, it's very much through this like fantasy rich romantic lens, although it's not skimping on any of the hardcore kink or roleplay. I think that's just a less intimidating thing to say, to approach your female partner with and say, hey, is this something you'd want to try? Because it's not showing women in a degrading way, unless the right kind of degrading. Of course, the right kind of degrading we love.
I love some consensual degradation. Absolutely. Yeah. You're spot on with that, because I end up as a sex and relationship coach working with a lot of men who fear letting their dominant side show because of years of counter teaching of don't be yourself, be gentle, be nice, don't be aggressive. And there's a confusion about what dominance is versus what I guess the alpha male is, which not a huge fan of that term anyway. But
because it's also based on a study that's debunked. It's really interesting to me always, like, what is dominant and what is not. And I mean, it's really funny. We've been watching Friends. I've never seen Friends because, again, I grew up in kind of a religious-y way. One of the many shows that were off the table, along with Sabrina the Teenage Witch, because that was considered a cult. I couldn't watch the crossover of Wizards of Waverly Place when they did the vampires, so no vampires. And also, I was not allowed to watch Friends because it was too sexual, which now watching it, I mean, it is kind of sexual, but we've been watching it. And, you have, like, Ross, who everyone loves to hate, and he is very overprotective, and he gets angry, and he gets aggressive. And it's just, I've been having this wonderful conversation with my husband about, like, he's really not attractive in most of those modes, except when he's, like, protective with a real understanding of, like, Rachel's needs. And I think that is the thing people get wrong about dominance, which for me is so much like a presence of mind and a control of self that just, like, by them being there, like, enables you to let go. And so that's, I think, such a different definition of dominance than one that is, like, seeking to control or exert on other people, rather than having almost like this magnetic presence that's drawing you in. When we think about, like, these dominant men, especially our customers who are, like, going out on a limb and buying a box that's all pink on the inside, for their wives or their partners or their girlfriends, I'm like, oh, to me, that's such a strong, like, masculine dominant man who's just so comfortable with themselves and is, willing to put themselves out there for their partner and lead the way in that way.
Do you see a lot of men buying the box?
Most of our business up to, box 3, it was really the majority of men, and not by a short amount, maybe by, it was, I'd say 80% or 90% men. And I think that, that just speaks to the need. If you're trying to be dominant and you don't have experience, where do you start? Really, there's not a lot that's going to help you other than, a listicle. And like a listicle can't really help you that much. That was kind of the trend, and that started to reverse a little bit, where we've been getting a lot more women with this fairy tale box that you had mentioned, because I think fae and fae romance and fairy, like, that's such a big part of the zeitgeist in female romance culture right now. I think it's really awesome to be able to tap into that with all these women and their book boyfriends, and you see sometimes content that's like, this is my book boyfriend, but to say, like, no, he can and he will. And I think just bridging that gap for us is, like, really our goal, where we can have both people kind of start from, this is where my fantasy experiences, this is where my locus of desire is, and here's how I can connect it to my real life partner and get to, like, share some of that about me and to develop a new exciting thing with them.
How are you releasing the boxes? Like, are there themes every quarter or something? Like, in 6 months, would I still be able to come to the site and buy the interrogation box?
We definitely take an evergreen approach. There are a lot of companies that like to do like this like exclusive like drop thing. Like, look, that's never going to be us unless we have a problem with stock. Like, we will have a problem with stock at some points. But the reason is because, you know, when we think about, especially like as a kinky person, right, where you have like things you come back to all the time. Mine is prison. There is a prison box. I'm obsessed with prison. I'm sorry. Like, I was cleaning out my phone the other day and I was looking through notes and I was like, why are there like 10 fully different unfinished prison eroticas on here? Like, what was I doing? Where was I when I was writing these? But it's something that I come back to. I'm like, how can I put a new spin on it? How can I do it a little bit differently? But I really like that. And I think that that's how the way a lot of people are. There's some, you know, they might like kink or roleplay or power exchange broadly very much. And of course they can like something that's a little bit out of their theme, you know, if it hits the right notes for them. But there are probably things that just speak to them in a slightly different way. We all have these different experiences that kind of drag us toward that. There are different elements of each thing. It's really important that we kind of have really, really good adventures that can speak to people's core that are always available. We had a subscription very briefly, but we got rid of it because with this box, it's not just like a bunch of stuff. You know, it's a costume or a lingerie piece that really we want to make sure is sized to you. We have all of these pieces. It's not like nuts, you know? Nuts aren't just like, it's just can't just come in the mail. We were trying to provide such a level of service where we were like checking in on people, like, what's your next box? That we were like, you know what, actually, like, they can contact us if they need us. Like, we need to let people have the space to pick it themselves. And we never want anyone to feel rushed. Like, that's the last thing you want from this kind of experience, is to feel like guilty. Oh, we had kids this week, like, we weren't available to get it. Like, I want people to have a good experience. I don't want anything to get in the way with it. So we kind of simplified and we got rid of the subscription. But, you know, you can regularly get it.
And I think that, like, it does make me more likely to come back to, because I don't feel forced to choose something immediately. I am really interested in the Fae one because, as I said, fantasy has never been my thing. So then this is providing an easy way to dip into it without having to, I don't know, read all of ACOTAR, which I've read the first two, you know, like, and it was really good. Yeah. Just haven't gone through the whole series. So I'm really excited about that. And then you also have the secretary one, which I'm a huge fan of putting on glasses and a skirt. So I felt prepared. I felt like I got that one down. But, like, how do you decide on what the next theme is going to be?
So we do have a next theme that we're ready, and I can tease that it's going to be called Arabian Nights. And so it's going to be our take on slave and master, but in a very different kind of way. So we have a lot of like fun surprises there coming up. But basically, our approach is really looking for inspiration in media, whether that's books or film. I don't think we've really done one that's around games, but we kind of are really in referencing games, you know, through the actual construction of the box. But we really are looking through those fantasies that are timeless, that captivate us, you know, before the screen goes to black. And then we're trying to fill in the blanks, kind of like, hey, what's happening that's a little past that PG-13 marker, you know? Because I think that that, for me, is where I've always been able to connect to my kink side much more than on some of the, you know, strange, kinky World Wide Web. I mean, one of my first experiences was that I had a recurring dream about Jafar kidnapping me, and because I saw the movie Aladdin when I was like 3.
Yes.
And I was just obsessed with that, you know? And so it's like, that's something we're showing to kids, but it was enough in my mind to click and to make that connection. So I think that's what we're really hoping, is that we can take people a little out of this, like, and not to say we'll never do schoolgirl, right? But to take them a little out of this, like, you're a naughty schoolgirl. There's something that, like, I think there's a world where some of that stuff can feel overplayed or corny, especially if you're not inoculated by having done a bunch of it, you know, taking what you like and leaving what you don't. So we're kind of trying to, like, clean the slate and go to something that has the same truth at its core, but something like you really never considered in that way before.
There is a definite draw for a lot of people to these types of themes, and also it's about getting lost in the fantasy of it. So yes. What's more fantastical, I guess, than an Arabian Nights theme?
I will say, like, an evergreen image in my mind, right, is Jasmine not in her blue outfit, Jasmine in her red outfit with the little chains on, where she's like pretending to be serving him so she can like distract Jafar so that Aladdin can like do whatever he's doing, something with the hourglass. So there's definitely that, and then the other thing is obviously Scheherazade, which I really like, but, you know, is a little intense in that there's the threat of her being killed if she cannot, you know, tell her story. So we're kind of trying to weave in some elements of that into our boxes in a way that, you know, kind of gives a little bit of a nod to them, but maybe is going to be a little bit more chill in some ways and maybe a little bit less chill in other ways.
So what's your process though of like, you're not just giving people, and I don't know if all of the boxes are like this, but with the interrogation scene, I had options of how I was going to play my character. They were fully baked out. There were 3 separate cards of you can play it any of these 3 ways, and it gave details on like how I might act in it. I mean, it was helpful until we did a little bit of our choose our own adventure in how we went with it, and I'm going to talk about that, but how do you create the interpretations of how the characters are going to be? Is that a little bit of your romance authoring and your husband's game design?
We try to really come up with a compelling storyline, a compelling through line, and that is something that really guides us in a lot of the choices that we make. But again, like, I'm so glad you called out, like, we do not provide a script, right? It's not like that. Like, we want to have a combination of stuff that's setting the mood for you, where even if you're just like, oh, that's kind of cute, like, that kind of puts it in my head, and stuff that's like, okay, as this variation, you know, you could do X or Y. So I think it kind of comes with that story. And then, like, with writing, when, at least for me, when I'm writing characters, it's kind of like, there's sort of this way they can go. If they do this kind of thing, then maybe that's someone who's a little bit more self-conscious, or if you do this kind of thing, it's somebody who's more brazen. And so we kind of like, as we're exploring, you know, different ways and different flavors for the scenario, we're kind of like, well, what kind of character makes sense for that? And it's really important to us to always have all the variations, because, you know, customers really report, like, it is just really like the starting place. Like, they can pick it up and go, but then they get so excited, like, ooh, next time, here's what I'm going to bring into it. And that's exactly what we want. We don't want you to, you know, have to stay by the book. We want you to feel inspired and feel empowered. Like with video games, we want to create like the really great sandbox for you to play in, and then this is something you can kind of come back to if you're looking for a new idea or you want to try something different. Because I think for me, like, you know, have almost like a default sub persona, I guess, that I like usually have. You know, it really is like an active effort to try to do something else, to give it a different flavor, to be more sensual or more confident. And, you know, like, you really have to kind of sit with yourself and be like, okay, these are the things I do. So we try to do some of that for you, and being like, okay, if you want to be a character that's more proud, or a character that's more domestic, and like kind of laying that out and giving you a little bit of the rationale behind it. I don't know, you know, for some people, like, that may not matter. I took like at least acting 1, and it was really, really, you know, rationale driven. So I think it can just kind of help get it in your head.
Are you also writing the dominant roles then?
Yeah, I do that with a kind of a combination of between, you know, me and my husband, because I think I'm really good at coming up with like the rationale, like the story, like who is this guy? And he's really good at coming out like, okay, and that's what you need to do to like be that guy, or to be that guy for your partner. But it's so wonderful to work with my husband, because there is like a gap in my knowledge, you know, being one half of the equation. Also, just in terms of speaking to the male fantasy part of it. For example, like with this interrogator one, the early drafts of this character for the guy were very much like, I just had this like sense from like, I guess, spy movies or like thrillers, of the guy being sort of like gruff, and he's like trying to retire all the time, blah, blah, blah. So like all of them were versions of that, and he was like, that's not appealing, because I think truly, then when I break it down and I get into like the tropes of things, that is the classic male fantasy hero arc, right? Which is this guy, and he was great, he's like trying to live his life on the farm, and people won't let him rest. So, like, I sometimes will over-index on that, because I'm so just subconsciously aware of it. But I think it's really great for him to really challenge me to say, like, hey, what are other interesting stories for the men here? Because even though we talk a lot about how female characters in media a lot of times are flattened, there's also a way in which male characters, although they're prominently featured, are also flattened. And that's kind of like, those two things are same size of the same coin, right? Even though, like, we're the sexual wellness company, just, you know, really digging into that and trying to bring out, like, what are different stories, like, what are different angles, like, what are different motivations for people, because we know that different people are going to identify with different things. We don't want it to just always be, like, the guy who's the lone wolf, you know, because we've just seen that story told so many times before. I think part of what we try to do with Saturday Box, this is kind of getting back to that conversation about, like, what does it really mean to be dominant? Instead of, you know, having characters that basically, like, one character just wants to control the other character. That's what's great about the situational, and I think that's what's so appealing about a lot of these non-sexual fantasies, is that it's grounded in motivation. Some of the internal power struggles are externalized by the circumstance, so you're able to follow it a little bit better. You're like, oh, it's not that he just, like, literally wants to tie this woman up. It's that he needs to tie this woman up, because if he doesn't tie her up, then she's going to get access to this thing, right? And so abstracting out to that level can make people feel a little more comfortable. And like, especially if you're just, in a place with your kinky desires where you're not as forthcoming about it, then it's like, okay, well, I have this objective, I'm just trying to accomplish this objective, and then wow, when we do it and I'm really titillated, now I can sit with that. So it's just taking you out of your head a little bit.
It really does, because it provides both a goal, but then again, the freedom to play it the way you want it. That's so important to me, because I didn't want something totally scripted. Like you said, the setup is strong. You can get into character enough to play it out. I love that it was open, and there's a couple of things. As the kink consultant, I am sometimes overly concerned with safety. So I loved the light level of like, hey, do this, don't do that. Like, establish a safe word. There were other parts of the game where it was like, say this, but make sure it's not the same word as your safe word. So you're like continuously reminding people, be risk aware of the situation. This is not Kink 101. So like, that's why I was able to come into it and really enjoy it, because I wasn't bogged down by safety. However, I felt comfortable knowing there were some safety tips for newer players. Not that my play partner is super new, I just would say that I've been involved in more scenes and more scene negotiation than him, so like knowing that he was able to like just be reminded of some of these things was helpful. Have you had feedback on that since launching?
I think that people really appreciate that there is that safety element. In the beginning, one of our big strategies was we were getting the box out to like a lot of sex therapists, and some who specialized in kink and some who didn't specialize in kink. And we got really great feedback about that, because I think people really liked, the information that we were providing, which we provide in every box, although we try to keep it different. And that's part of our advantage as a kink and roleplay brand, where instead of it being the one kinky box among many different boxes, some of them are like, use a feather under your nose, right? People kind of know what they're getting into with us. So we get to give specific to that box, hey, here's something that might come up for you, calling that out. And then it's almost like we get to be the bad guy instead of you having to like bring up to your partner. Now, we're never going to get everything, so we really try to give that framework of like, hey, mistakes might happen. Here are times where you might want to pause, like make sure you're reading their body language. Do not rely on a safe word. Like, that's very important. But I think it's kind of nice for us to be able to do that, as well as kind of like acknowledging, I do think there's this concept of like kink progression that we can fall into, which is like, what's the first thing you might want to do? Tell your partner like to stay where they are, or like to maybe try, fuzzy handcuffs. And we do have boxes we think are a little more beginnery and boxes we think are a little more advanced. But we also try to acknowledge that like everyone's kind of in a different place. And so something that might seem advanced to someone is kind of beginnery to someone else, especially when it comes to role playing, if that's the part you're uncomfortable with. I think that there's a danger, not a physical danger, but I guess just a personal danger sometimes when you start too low on that scale. If you're somebody who's intensely kinky, like that was one of my experiences. And I walked away from that experience not being hurt at all, but thinking like, oh God, was I wrong? Do I not like kink? And again, the guy, he was like attractive and he was my friend, and like I think it was like not the right setup and framing for me. And so I think that's what's important, is that like we want to give even beginners, even if they're not doing the most quote unquote hardcore stuff, the framing they need to have a really good experience. And like, look, I'm sure like if somebody who's very vanilla and does it, they might still say it's not for them, but hopefully they can enjoy the other elements of it that are about playing with your partner, that are, romantic and sensual and stuff like that. And they can like, tailor their experience towards that. But we just want to make sure like we're giving people enough of the pie that they can kind of launch off of it rather than doubt themselves and their whole identity.
For sure. Oh my gosh. Because already sex education is lacking so much. This is like a soapbox that I've been on lately. And kink exists, and you and I were both kinky from a very young age, but had no context, had no education around it. We were just sort of like, I always describe myself as walking around feeling like a little weirdo. Because I was like, I know I'm into something that I know not to talk about openly, but I don't understand it. And I actually think a lot of my true sexual development was far delayed because of it. Because I couldn't understand that what I was interested in had anything to do with my sex life. And I'm not saying all kink does. There are definitely, like, it can be separated, but for me, it's almost like important foreplay. And because I didn't have that connection and couldn't understand it, it took me a lot longer to come to the realization of what I enjoy is called kink, and it's a regular thing, and this is how people practice it. So I had to piece it together slowly with almost no information. And I, at least came from like a much more maybe open household where sex was even talked about. It sounds like you had the double difficult position of sex wasn't even discussed.
Actually, my parents gave me a birds and the bees talk pretty soon, because at our church, they were having like victims of sexual assault, like some Christian group like speak, and I was like in second grade, and so they were like, do you know what sex is? And I was like, yeah, I know, like sex is like when you're sexy, like America's Top Model, because that was a show that I watched, and I knew it was like when you do the lips and you do your shoulders, like that. I got that sense, right, because it exists sort of outside of, you know, insertion. But then they explained to me like, oh, okay, actually, like this is what literally sex would be. So I technically knew, but so much of that was missing. I would have even feelings in my body, or like feelings when I saw certain things, you know, like tingles in my neck, tingles down my spine, and not know how to interpret that. I started going on these, you know, strange kink websites that are still probably up, you know, where they're neon colors and like weird pop-up ads.
Yes.
And I didn't know that they were kink because people aren't really having sex. And I'd be like, wow, why am I so interested in it? That's weird. I mean, I read a pirated version of 50 Shades of Grey on the bus when I was part of a Miss Teen USA pageant. I was just like reading it privately to myself and being like, this is so interesting and compelling. I don't know what to do with this. I would like be on the site Literotica in AP US History reading it. Here's where the like healthy line would be. So everything just felt really blurred. And I think that can be what's scary with kink, is where you're not sure what's okay, so it's hard to know what's not okay for you, because it already feels like you're past the line where everyone would say, oh, this is not okay, like you shouldn't be doing this to women, you shouldn't be restrained by your partner, blah blah blah, everything's supposed to be wild and free. So I think it's hard to interpret like, hey, where are my personal boundaries? And it took a really long time for me to develop that sense.
Yes, I am obviously all for consent, but my personal boundaries and what I'm open to feeling I need to consent to versus what I would just want to happen, especially as a submissive partner, is really difficult to balance out sometimes because the nuances aren't taught. That's what you have to figure out for yourself.
And I think part of our larger mission with Saturday Box is normalizing kink, and not just normalizing it in terms of, okay, people know about it and they, you know, accept that people do it, right? To kind of change what that means and what that means to the world. Because realistically, like when we talk about consent, we're talking about changing not only sometimes what like a legal definition, we're changing the norms of like what's acceptable, right? Is it acceptable to kiss someone without asking? I think for some people, they would like to be asked. But for me, like I'm adopted, I grew up with Italian Americans, and every relative that is not even related to you kisses you on the mouth. It's not like you love it. It's fine. And you know, it's not a violation. It's more just like now you have some old person's mouth on you. You know, and I think that because through my mindset of that's what it is, it would be pretty hard for me to feel violated depending on the circumstances. Obviously, if I'm at work and my boss kisses me, right, that is, you know, definitely sexual harassment.
Good example.
But you know, if I'm on a date where there's supposedly we're trying to figure out, is there, you know, some chemistry between us, and knowing that I'm someone who likes my partner to take the lead, I want them to be able to read that off of me. And in existing in that world, I have to accept there are times where they might misread it, and I might get kissed a time where I wasn't, you know, wanting to. And then the question for me is like, does that have to be a violation for me? Or am I saying, you know, it's worth the trade-off of me feeling like guys that I want to kiss me can kiss me.
I love this example because I have this conversation with my girlfriends all the time. First date, do you want them to just go in for the kiss or ask, can I kiss you? And we're kind of divided. So it's hard for men and women, I think, to figure it out. You know, like what's the way to go? But for the record, I want someone to just go for it. Just go for the kiss. Don't ask me. Don't like put more questions in my head. Let's just go and see from there.
And you know, I've also had times where I was totally 100% on board with the kissing, and then we kissed, and then I went, you know, it's not it. So it was good information for me to have. I was like, good. Glad that we kissed. Glad now saved everybody some time.
I know, it does save time when you get a kiss on the first date. Maybe I should be kissing more on a first date, because like I won't go for it. And if they don't go for it, I'm not going to be like, come here. That's not my way.
One of the predominant features about kink, to me, emotional intelligence. And I think like that's one of the things that makes it succeed the most, because, you know, you should be having the safety discussions. You should be laying it out online. A lot of it is like creating an environment where people are comfortable enough to do this with you. Creating an environment where you're engaging in, you know, like we'll say semi-risky behavior, and you want someone who's like both partners should be watching out for the other one. And I think that to me, that's sort of where kissing is like that entry into it, where it's like, I want to be kissed. and not someone to have to ask me, but I want them to be right, you know? And if they're not right, I'm not like angry with them, but like that's also something I'm looking for in a partner, someone who can read my body signals, because that's incredibly important once you start getting into that, you know, someone who is so present. And that's just, again, also funny because I would say like my husband is the most like empathetic, considerate, mindful, careful kind of person. People would say, oh, that's not the kind of alpha dominant person you're looking for. And I'm like, no, that is the kind of person, because when they're throwing you around, you want them to not throw you into furniture. You want them to drop you hard enough on the bed, but like be careful of like where your wrist is and not bend you at a different angle. Like that's what creates a good experience, because nothing kills it faster than when you get a boo-boo, which you're gonna get a boo-boo sometimes, you know, but like avoid, right? Yeah, so I think that, again, that's again where we're like changing the perception of like what people are looking for in partners. I've heard horror stories, right, of women like getting involved in kink from guys. But I mean, I think it has to do with if people are interested in that, do they know the right people? Do they know the right way to be getting engaged with that? And it's just changing that perception of like who does it. It's not like some creepy guy. If you said, oh, it's someone who is like emotionally intelligent that you feel safe enough to do that with them, well, I mean, that's a pretty big difference than what is the current norm and expectation around kink now.
All right, Kinkster, let's talk about pleasure. Not just mine, yours too. If you're enjoying this episode of the Kink Consultant, I need you to do me a little favor, and I promise it'll feel oh so good. Take a second and give this podcast a 5-star rating. Just imagine your finger sliding all over that 5th star, pressing down, giving it exactly the kind of attention it deserves. Yeah, that's it. And you know what happens when you do? I get all hot and bothered knowing you're out there, showing your appreciation. Plus, every time you leave a review, a naughty little brat somewhere gets that spanking they've been begging for. So be a good listener and tap that star, won't you? Thanks, love. Now let's get back to the fun.
Very true. And I just want to take a second to just call out the fact that that's another problem with kink being so underground, is that when you find someone who's into it, you're like, oh my God, this is the one person who's into it. I'll accept all the red flags to practice it. And people don't realize you can easily teach a partner. Things like Saturday Box make it easier for partners to learn. And then it doesn't need to be this secret thing. And you don't need to put up with poor character or all of these red flags just to have your sexual needs met or your kinky needs met. One of my hottest scenes ever was a spanking scene. As we know, I'm obsessed with spanking. And the guy spanking me, to this day, we talk about how it was one of our hottest scenes. He would notice when I wasn't breathing, when I was holding my breath, and he would say, breathe, Amanda. And I was just like, and then I'd realize I was holding my breath, and I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? It's truly, our relationship is just spanking, but to this day, we will travel to each other and have scenes, right? And it was that sort of like, we understand each other's body language. That helps. And it's the care and intention. Like, you say that to me, and I'm like, oh, and because it's like that someone, you know, is doing this intense thing, and they're able to, you know, compartmentalize and say, like, oh, I'm also really concerned about her. And I mean, maybe it's not even compartmentalizing. It's the same thing. And that's, like, what makes it so hot. I know, and it's not talked about enough. It is reading that body language, and once you're doing that, you can kind of understand, am I being too hard? And I actually think that's important, once again, for things like an interrogation, which is, that's a risky scene to play sometimes, because essentially, here's how I view it, and here's why I love it. You're playing to a safe word in a way. You're playing up until the point, and there are very few times where I even want to play to a safe word, but in an interrogation scene, that's the aim. It's like, I'm going to essentially torture you until you give me what I want. So instead of safe wording, I'm giving the code to the box. In this example, it sort of allows me a freedom to just play hard and not have to, it's like, okay, I can get out of this at any time. I don't have to worry about anything. I'm going to take what I can take. I'm going to have fun with it. And then when I'm ready to give up, I'll just give the code. And it was so good. Like, something else that I don't think I see a lot of, and I haven't tried a lot of these things, but you included nipple clamps. And I think nipple clamps, for anyone who's, I love them, but for anyone who's not familiar, the intensity goes up. Actually taking them off can be more painful than having them on. So depending on how hard they're being pulled on, but including those, I didn't feel like I was doing a beginner box, even though there were beginner elements to how it was set up. I was like, wow, this is trusting me. So that you trust your purchasers a lot.
Where we're coming from is a little bit different than where I think a lot of kink education or things are coming from, which is kind of this idea of like, you know, you're with a total stranger. Like, Saturday Box is probably not great for total strangers, unless you're just like really trusting and you're like, I believe in this person like 100%, which, you know what, that's your prerogative.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, what we're really designed for are couples who have relationship chemistry, who have sex, right? So, like, of course we're going to talk about safe words and consent, but if it's someone who you already have this active relationship, you have a language, so then we're really just that add-on of like, here's what you definitely want to have in your toolbox when you're bringing it to the next level. And so I think that that's where we want to be available to beginners. We're not like for beginners to sex or beginners to relationships. We're for people who are, you know, experts with relationships, experts with sex, hopefully, you know, try, and this is just a new frontier. And so I think that enables us to like trust people a little more. We're always trusting that you care about this person and that you want to do right by them. And I think no matter what we have written on the card, if that's true, like, I do feel that kink can be a very safe and rewarding experience. And if that's not true, then there's nothing that we can write to, you know, help that case, right?
You're 100% right. I like this Saturday box because it did give me that trust. It was sort of like, I felt like I wasn't being babied into it. It was sort of like, you're kinky, we see you, try this. Those were my marching orders. And within it, oh God, the scene was so hot. Emma, can I tell you about it? Because I'm done.
Yes, please tell me. I'd love to know.
Okay, so I did it with my friends with benefits, and we've been seeing each other for like 3-4 months, sexually very understanding of each other, so we have experience, right? I went into this being like, listen, I'm really just looking for friends with benefits, and this isn't going to last very long. He took the opportunity with the Saturday box, and I mean, hats off to him. I'm pretty impressed he did this. So he had me tied up, nipple clamps on, and he took this opportunity to ask me why I didn't want more with him. So he like interrogated me about this, and he reminded me multiple times that any time we could stop, all I had to do was give him the code. So it was like both forced to think like, okay, how honest do I want to be with him and myself versus how soon do I just want to get out of this and give the code? And ultimately, it was the nipple clamps that brought me down. Like,
okay. Not the children's electric shock toy.
Not that, because I could handle the fear. I can even handle a lot of pain. What else? Oh, he brought ice up from dinner, and I immediately knew when he got a cup of ice, I was like, that ice is going to be painful. And he made sure it was in many places. But yeah, the nipple clamps are what did me in. So I was like, damn these nipple clamps being included. But did love the bondage tape being included.
Yes.
Bondage tape is something I recommend to a lot of people because it's so easy to use that is kind of idiot-proof.
It's also really versatile. You can do like gags, like where it goes around the mouth and you just tighten. Basically, for anyone who does not know what bondage tape is, right, it sticks to itself, so there's nothing sticky. So it's great because you don't have that like Band-Aid ripping off. It sticks to itself, so you kind of are using just like static cling essentially to get it together. So you can wrap it around your mouth a bunch of times, which you might not want to do something like duct tape. So you can use it for a lot of different things. It's so easy to use. And I really love that you were riffing on things. I think that's amazing. And I love that you were able to bring in an element of your relationship. We talk a lot about like scenes, and we talk about like start and stop. And something that we really want to kind of, you know, incorporate with Saturday Box is, one, people being able to like put their own riffs on it like you did, but also, you know, figuring out how this is going to be able to kind of add a little bit of spice to just your, you know, your relationship, and like a thing that you can reference or thing that you can kind of get excited for, because I think that's another joy once you're, you know, whether you identify as being someone who's a kinkster or like is into kink, just that like sense of like playful banter, having that in the relationship, you know, when you have these big banner moments, and then you can kind of just poke and tease and, you know, brat around. I need that equally. So giving you a little bit of something to talk about, I think, is really great. So yeah, bringing in that Friends with Benefits was an absolute ace move.
Prior to even knowing Saturday Box existed, we had been discussing an interrogation scene around a question of whether or not I'd applied for my passport, and unbeknownst to him, I had my passport, and that's what was waiting in the box, because it was like, yes, I applied, I have a passport. It was just a really good way to up the ante. And also, he had never done an interrogation scene before, so it helped him, whereas I have been both interrogated and on the interrogating side many times. It was good to have the support system of Saturday Box. And he looked hot as fuck in the suspenders. Like, when I was like, damn, that's such a good move to include those two. I feel I looked good in my outfit too.
When we think about what we want Saturday Box to be, a lot of it is based off of like my good experiences and my bad experiences. And my bad experiences have not been like kinky situations where I've been pushed too far in general, I would actually say. It's more from people who did not necessarily express an interest in kink, or were thought conflate that with sort of like rough sex, and just the norms around it not being, you know, what we want. So I think in some ways, like, that's what we are doing more for safety than even like the safety card, is kind of painting this picture picture of like, this is what the ideal case looks like, and kind of giving you that menu and buffet of options of things to choose from, so that you're not just pulling things completely out of left field, you know? And so it's like, okay, well, obviously ice is like right next door, you know, like you kind of know, it gives you something to kind of slot stuff into.
Because we were in a hotel room too. These are great for hotel rooms because you're already out of your element. The night before when we were packing, I took everything out of the box and like it was just easy to bring like a few things and then pack the cards. So just really great. It is an adventure, and what better time to go on an adventure than when on vacation?
No, I definitely feel that. Sometimes I'm like the horniest when we're on a trip and we're just somewhere else.
Yeah, because you're not worried about laundry. You're not worried about your schedule. You're just able to relax.
And I think there is, again, that's part of like the painting the mood, where there is something like, oh, you're really trying to get into it, and then you're like looking at that like chip in the paint and you're like, oh, I gotta get that fixed. So I think that's something that can also help people. I mean, my view, again, is that I would say that most people are kinky. This is like, my belief is that most people are kinky, and some people are prevented from realizing this kink. And I think from that mindset, which is a very different mindset than I need to find and can only be with the small portion of people that were willing to do this weird stuff with me, right? That kind of opens you up to saying, no, I'm normal. The people who are not doing this kink, I mean, maybe it's just that they're very calm and comfortable. So, you know, good on them. You know, if you have that mindset, then I think that you can kind of ask for more in your relationships and not be as afraid. It's, you know, it's more like, oh, we're just kind of getting in touch with that natural human side of us. That's kinky.
Kink is such a wide spectrum that I think people forget that just saying, like a few weeks ago on the podcast I had Life with Dillion, we talked about how just saying good girl is actually kinky. So yes, I would agree with you. I think most people are kinky. They are play with kink in their relationship. Okay, speaking of most people being kinky, I am a switch. I recognize from how the box is, I could easily be the interrogator, right? The outfits would be different though, and the rules would be different. So, do you plan on making a box with a switch? Have you had female doms reach out saying that they wanted a box? A lot of my clients are women who want to be more dominant, and they come to learn from me.
Yeah, I mean, we do have occasionally people who say, oh, hey, you know, I like to play the other way. Is Saturday Box going to be good for me? So we put together this little guide called Switching It Up that's available on our website. It's like in our How to Play guide. So this is kind of like, hey, here's like boxes that are a little better for that. Here are elements that we play with. One of them is we have the different variations, and we do include a little blurb on the main card of like kind of an alternate backstory if you want to gender swap things. And then for our sensual experience, which we basically have, the boxes usually kind of have two experiences. We have the main one, and then we have a sensual starter that's a little bit, we'll say, calmer. It's a little bit of a different activity that's kind of warming you up to things in general. So we try to do a little bit, turn down the role play, turn down the kink, turn up the romance and the sensuality. And that's something we do to not just please people who want something a little more neutral where they can swap roles, but we also do it as kind of like a warm-up, or for people where, you know, maybe that's the one that people really like because they're just like, I love touching, I like love the focus and presence of mind. So we kind of have that. As far as like making our own specific roles, you know, fully flipped boxes, like as you can see, you know, we really have such a deep well of knowledge that's based in personal experience, and I unfortunately am not a switch at all. So I think that we would probably have to be at the kind of size where we could justify like experimental going the other box way. And we'd have to hire someone, because I feel like, you know, one of the reasons that we're not gender neutral is because there is a lot to play off of with gender dynamics when it comes to power dynamics. There are a lot of ways that women have historically been cast in roles, both in fantasy and history and in different situations, that I think there is a sense of, you know, them being able to use their sexuality kind of to manipulate the outcome. And so that's a lot of what we're playing with Saturday Box. And so if we were to switch that, it would just be looking at a completely different set, and we would want to apply as much care and attention to it. And I don't feel like I could do it. You know, I don't really know enough about that side of the tree to be able to say I represent, you know, this experience for all those kinksters.
Thank you for answering that. I love knowing that the switch part exists on the website, but also I understand, in my experience, the majority breakdown is there are a lot of male doms and female submissives, and that is a lot of the dynamics that I see. So I understand, like, that is a majority too out there, or at least it feels like it. I'm not saying that's all that there is out there, but like, your Saturday Box is catering to a specific group of people, as businesses do. You have chosen your market, and that is who it is.
We're a very niche small business, and you know, it comes down to like, I truly believe that we can be as dedicated and as niche and be pretty big, because I believe that most people are kinky, and I believe that there's a huge contingent of people that are MDOM F-sub that would do this. But that's not been proven, and it's going to be proven hopefully by our continued business success, right? And so I think that in some ways we're already taking a big swing in being as specific and non-mass market as we are. So I think that, you know, we really want to be able to say, well, how big is this niche? And then I also would assume that may be a sizable chunk, but it's probably a smaller one. So you can only know what the size of the smaller circle is once you know the size of the larger circle. And we have no idea what the size of the larger circle is right now, you know?
If you want to have as much fun as I had during my interrogation scene, I highly recommend you check out SaturdayBox.com and use code TKC at checkout for 10% off. Code expires May 30th.
I feel that as a kink creator on social media, it's sort of like I'm not giving general sex advice. The fact that I even use the word kink is quite alienating. I love that you're a kink and roleplay adventure. Roleplay itself is at least a word that people are more familiar with and can identify with. Whereas when you say kink, it's almost like people put up like a, that's not me, that's not me. Do you know what I mean? Because kink in the media has been portrayed by a lot of alternative types. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like some of my best friends are the exact epitome of like the kinky alternative type, but then it makes it hard for other people to identify. I think that's one of the things that I've noticed. Not the kink community, actually, the general community who we're describing are probably kinky or enjoy some kink. What they're imagining is, oh, I'm not kinky because I don't like whips and chains. And it's like, there's so much more to it.
And this is something that has been said, like we were watching Bones. There was some line in it that was talking about, it was like an S&M episode. And there was some line about like, I don't need to hurt people to have good sex. And it was so smug. There was like really a time that was like very anti-kink, but kink had entered the chat in, I would say probably like 2000s to maybe like early 2010. And I think that's been changing, you know? So I think that's part of why I feel really good about this business. But there was this time where people started to have this awareness, but like the sense that like you had to do it because you couldn't get what you needed out of regular sex, like boo-hoo, right? Like I think some of it's on the kink community for developing their identity in such a way that can be very unwelcoming, like even the like BDSM thing, which is the worst initialization ever because none of the things even mean one set thing. Why would you come up with something that doesn't even stand for the correct thing? But yeah, then the term is like used to be BDSM practitioners. All studies would say BDSM practitioners, which sounds like a terrible kind of weird quack doctor. So, you know, now we've evolved to kink, but even some people with kink feel nervous. With role play, it's more conventionally acceptable. You know, Modern Family had role play scenes in it, and they were not denigrating. They were humorous, but it was like, you know, you're in on the joke. However, there are people, like I had a friend, you know, a previous friend with benefits. We did a bunch of kinky stuff together, and he, you know, knows I have his company, he's very supportive of it, and he's just like, oh, but I would never do one of those boxes because I don't role play. And I was like, okay, well, would you do costumes? And he's like, yes. And I'm like, well, you obviously do all the kink stuff. And he's like, yes. And so for some reason, that drew a line in the sand for him because I guess he just felt like it was too silly. But the thing is, we were doing role play because when I was doing like Yes Master, or like letting him crop me, I am playing because I don't have to let him because he has no power over me. So, you know, a lot of it is that mindset and the labels that we put on it. But at the same time, I would say from a brand perspective, there are brands that are like, as you mentioned, alternative, unapologetically kinky, you know, leather hoods, like red and black, and like that exists. And that, you know, is very like unapologetic, but it also can be a little unwelcoming. And then you kind of have this other entrant into the market where you have like the Gen Z pastel type brands that are like, it's just women, you know, it's just completely about empowerment and like getting in touch with yourself. And like, I like the mission of a lot of those brands, but there's something very like sanitized and corporate about them. Yeah. And like, for example, like there's like OMG Yes or something. There are all these things that are like ethical, like porn for women. And it's always like, I don't want to see violence against women. And like, I don't want to see violence against women either. But what they kind of mean to say, they're kind of talking out of the side of their mouth and being like, the only kind of like BDSM or kink we want to see would be the like most gentle form of like we're mutually tying each other up, and that's not going to do it for me, you know? So I think really being able to try to create a brand where we are informed by, you know, wanting people to feel good and wanting to strengthen relationships, but we're not shying away from actual kink, from actual degradation, from like dehumanization, you know? Like, I think people like good girl and then they don't like the flip side a lot of the time. I think that like good girl is okay in popular culture, right? Because it's like affirming and positive. People are like, I want you to call me by my number, and like maybe let's like not do it, but let's think about what would it be like if you shaved my head. You know, like I want to say that, you know, the people, like our customers, like we're never gonna have head shaving in a box, okay? That's something like in my personal life that I am struggling with about if that's something I would ever want to happen to me, right? I'm saying like, hey, you know what? You can be someone who looks like a good girl, and you could be down bad, and here we want to have a brand that will support you in both of those ways.
I love that. What more needs to be said? That's who you are in your essence, and I love it. And I think that it really comes through as a BDSM practitioner. That is what I got from it. Sort of like radical acceptance of no matter where I was or who I was going to have fun doing this. And I did. And I hope to do many more. So when's that new box coming out?
The new box, I think, is going to come out in May. I feel really, really excited about this next one. I honestly will say that I feel like every box is like a little better than the last in a way, but like I still love the prison one. The prison one's my favorite.
I want to try the prison one because I said I had those fantasies, but the fairy one, because it's so different from any fantasy I've ever had, I think I want to try it for that novel experience. So now I want the experience of like a total newbie going through something like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, one thing we did love when we were working more tightly with customers is really being able to see that kind of like everyone's a bunch of different things, but a little bit of that dichotomy that we kind of always expected, where like maybe people who like interrogation in prison are on one side of the fence, and maybe people who like, you know, fairy and office romance are on the other side of the fence. I think that's the other thing, part of why we try to be so niche, is because within this niche, there are so many sub-niches, you know? If we zoomed out, we would lose all of that, right? It would just be like the box for the kinky person, the same shit we've seen before. I think that is something that's really cool. For me, with the prison, just to put this so people know why I like it. The prison thing is like, one, it's very interesting. Like that is the only case, not to say this is a great thing in real life, but it's one of the only cases in modern life where you can like take control of someone and put them in some weird system and push them around and restrain them. That's the case where handcuffs are being used.
Yeah.
So I think for me, there's something about that. And like the way that the prison outfit is like not sexy is sexy to me, because it's this idea of like the worst thing could happen to you where you're like shamed by society, you're cast off, and like still you're kind of hot. Like to me, it's like the gauntlet. It's, you know, it's like the highs and the lows. And I think a lot of kink is actually about that, right? It's about like the highs and the lows where you're pushed to some extreme and you kind of still come through. That's how I feel, at least, about like spanking, where like it's that like, you know, sometimes it can be pleasant, but mostly, or at least for spanking's usually pleasant. Like cropping is like me and my nemesis, and it's the kind of thing where I don't really like it, but I do like it. And part of what I like about it is almost what I call the Gom Jabbar, you know, from Dune, where you put your hand in the thing.
Yes.
So like you put your hand in the box, and the like scary nun says, it's gonna hurt like a bitch, and if you take your hand out of the box, you're gonna die, because an animal would take their hand out of the box, but a human or like a wise man would be able to withstand the pain. And so I have a conception of life that's sort of like that a little bit, and it definitely applies specifically to me getting cropped. And I think there's like a sense of like, I hate this, but obviously I can stop it anytime I want to, right? I can endure it, and I can accept that like I didn't drink enough water today, so I'm getting cropped, and that's the situation. And like, I think that sense of like being driven to a limit and then being able to like surprise yourself and to overcome, or to show like how strong you are, to have this intense experience with someone who you're so close with. Like I think that there's a lot with that.
It has been such a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for bringing Saturday Box to the world. That is what I want to thank you for, because it's really exciting to have something like this, and to know that even I, who self-prescribed very kinky person, a box full of toys, it's for all ranges of kinksters. You include everything that needs to be there, and then some. Super special, and I felt very sexy. And that's like something that's hard to do too, I think, to make people feel sexy, even maybe in a prison outfit. So thank you so much for coming on. And for anyone who wants to check out Saturday Box, and I highly recommend you do, go to SaturdayBox.com. You can also follow them on Instagram as @Saturday_box. Check out all the different boxes. I might have to put a guarantee on it that you're going to have a good time, because that's how confident I am that people will. Emma, thank you so much. And I am excited for all the future things that Saturday Box has to bring.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with anyone who might find it interesting. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes, feel free to reach out. Email info@thekinkconsultant.com. Until next time, keep on kinking on.